The hunger gnawing at her belly had become such a constant companion that Annabelle Dixon barely noticed it anymore, as she crawled beneath the wooden bridge spanning the shallow creek, just outside Aurora, Colorado. It was September of 1876, and the nights were growing colder in the mountains, but the worst cold came from knowing that somewhere out there, the men who had killed her father were still looking for her. She pulled the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders and pressed herself against the rough stone foundation, listening to the distant sounds of the town settling in for the night. She had been living like this for 3 weeks now, ever since she had witnessed her father's murder over a worthless mining claim that had turned out to contain more gold than anyone had expected. The dampness seeped through her worn dress, and Annabelle shivered, trying to make herself as small as possible in the shadows. Her auburn hair, once carefully pinned and proper, now hung in tangled waves down her back. Dirt streaked her face and hands, and her clothes were torn in places from scrambling through brush and sleeping rough. At 19 years old, she had gone from being a respectable miner's daughter to a hunted fugitive in a matter of hours, all because she had seen the faces of the 3 men who had shot her father in cold blood and left him bleeding in the dirt. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but the memory kept replaying. Her father, Thomas Dixon, had been a good man, an honest prospector who had worked his claim faithfully for 2 years before finally striking a rich vein. He had been so excited that morning, had told her they would finally have enough money to send her back east to live with her aunt, to get a proper education and escape the hard life of the mining camps. By noon, he was dead, and the 3 men who worked the neighboring claim had been standing over his body, arguing about how to split the gold. Annabelle had been bringing her father his lunch when she saw it happen. She had dropped the basket and run, crashing through the pine forest with her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She had heard them shouting behind her, heard the crack of gunfire as they shot at her fleeing form. But she knew these mountains better than they did, had spent 2 years exploring every trail and creek while her father worked his claim. She had managed to lose them in the thick timber, and by nightfall she had made it to Aurora. But Aurora was a small town, and strangers were noticed. The 3 men had friends, connections, and they had spread word that she was crazy, that she had killed her own father in a fit of madness and run off. They had put a price on her head, claiming they just wanted to bring her in safely to face justice. Annabelle knew better. She knew they wanted her dead before she could tell anyone the truth about what had happened to Thomas Dixon, so she hid. During the day, she stayed in the deep woods outside of town, foraging for berries and stealing the occasional egg from henhouses on the outskirts. At night, she crept into town and slept under bridges in abandoned sheds, anywhere she could find shelter without being seen. She had become a ghost, a shadow, barely surviving from one day to the next. Tonight was particularly cold, and sleep would not come. Annabelle lay awake, listening to the creek babble beneath the bridge, and wondered how much longer she could survive like this. Winter was coming to the Colorado mountains, and she had no warm clothes, no food, no money. She was alone in a world that wanted her dead or imprisoned for a crime she had not committed. The sound of footsteps on the bridge above made her freeze. Heavy boots, moving slowly, deliberately. Annabelle held her breath, pressing herself harder against the stone. The footsteps stopped directly above her hiding spot. "I know you are down there," a deep voice called out. It was not unkind, but it was firm and certain. "Been watching you slip under this bridge 3 nights running now. You can come out or I can come down and fetch you. Your choice." Annabelle's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked around desperately for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. If she ran along the creek bed, he would see her. If she climbed up the bank, he would be waiting. She was trapped. "I do not mean you harm," the voice continued. "But you cannot keep sleeping rough like this. Winter is coming, and you will freeze to death before November if you do not get proper shelter." Something in his tone made her hesitate. It did not sound like the voices of the men who hunted her. There was no cruelty in it, no edge of violence. Just a statement of fact, delivered in a calm, measured way. Slowly, Annabelle crawled out from beneath the bridge, clutching her blanket around her shoulders. She looked up at the man standing on the bridge above, silhouetted against the star-filled sky. He was enormous. That was her first thought. Broad-shouldered and thick with muscle, he stood well over 6 feet tall. Long, dark hair fell past his shoulders, and a full beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore buckskin pants and a heavy wool shirt, and a rifle was slung across his back. He looked like he had stepped out of the mountains themselves, wild and untamed and powerful. "That is better," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Now come on up here where I can see you properly." Annabelle climbed the bank on shaking legs, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. But when she reached the top and stood on the bridge facing him, the man made no move to grab her or restrain her. He simply studied her with dark eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her appearance. "You look half-starved," he said after a moment. "And you have been sleeping rough for weeks by the look of you. What is your name, girl?" Annabelle's throat was dry. She had not spoken to another person in so long that her voice came out as a rasp. "That is none of your concern." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Fair enough. You do not trust me. That is smart, given that you are clearly running from something. But I am offering you a hot meal and a safe place to sleep for the night. You can accept or refuse. Makes no difference to me either way." "Why would you help me?" Annabelle asked suspiciously. "You do not even know me." "Because I have seen enough suffering in my life to recognize it when I see it," the man replied. "And because leaving you to freeze to death under a bridge does not sit right with my conscience. My name is Daniel Irons. I have a cabin about 5 miles up into the mountains. You can stay there tonight, get some food in your belly, warm yourself by a fire. Tomorrow, if you want to leave, you leave. No obligations." Annabelle stared at him, trying to read his intentions. Everything about Daniel Irons seemed honest and straightforward, from his direct gaze to his open posture. But she had been betrayed before, had learned the hard way that not everyone could be trusted. As if reading her thoughts, Daniel sighed. "Look, I understand your hesitation. But you need to make a choice here. You can keep running and hiding until the cold or hunger or whoever is chasing you catches up, or you can take a chance on someone who is offering help. I have lived in these mountains for 8 years, and I have no interest in whatever trouble you are fleeing. I keep to myself, mind my own business, and expect others to do the same." The wind picked up, cutting through Annabelle's thin dress like a knife. She shivered violently, and her empty stomach cramped with hunger. She was so tired, so worn down by fear and cold and hunger. The thought of a warm fire and hot food was almost more than she could resist. "How do I know you are not one of them?" she asked quietly. "One of the men looking for me." Daniel's expression softened slightly. "You do not. You will have to trust your instincts. But if I wanted to hurt you or turn you in for whatever reward might be on your head, I could have done it already. I could have grabbed you while you were trapped under that bridge. Instead, I am standing here having a conversation and offering you a choice." He was right, Annabelle realized. He could have easily overpowered her, could have dragged her into town or done worse. But he had not. He had given her the option to refuse and walk away. "One night," she said finally, "and if I want to leave in the morning, you let me go, no questions asked." "Agreed," Daniel said. He gestured toward a large horse standing patiently nearby, nearly invisible in the darkness. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Annabelle said. She had learned to ride as a child, though it had been months since she had been on a horse. Daniel swung himself up into the saddle with easy grace, then extended his hand down to her. Annabelle hesitated only a moment before taking it. His hand was warm and calloused, the grip strong and steady as he pulled her up behind him as if she weighed nothing at all. "Hold on," he said over his shoulder. "The trail up to my cabin is rough in places." Annabelle wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid wall of muscle beneath the wool shirt. She could feel the warmth of his body through the fabric, and she found herself pressing closer, desperate for heat after so many cold nights sleeping rough. Daniel urged the horse forward, and they left the bridge behind, heading up into the dark mountains. The trail was narrow and winding, barely visible in the starlight, but the horse seemed to know the way and Daniel guided it with confident ease. They climbed steadily upward, leaving the lights of Aurora far behind, moving deeper into the wilderness. Annabelle had no idea if she was making a terrible mistake. This man could be leading her anywhere, could have any intentions at all. But something deep inside her, some instinct she had learned to trust during her weeks of running and hiding, told her that Daniel Irons was telling the truth. He was offering help, nothing more and nothing less. The ride took nearly an hour, climbing up through pine forests and across rocky clearings. The air grew colder as they gained elevation, and Annabelle shivered despite the warmth of Daniel's body in front of her. Finally, they emerged into a small clearing where a sturdy log cabin stood beneath the shelter of towering pines. Daniel dismounted and helped Annabelle down, then led his horse to a small barn beside the cabin. "Make yourself at home," he called over his shoulder. "Door is unlocked. I will be in shortly once I have taken care of the horse." Annabelle approached the cabin cautiously, half expecting a trap. But when she pushed open the door, she found only a simple, well-maintained interior. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a small but tidy kitchen area occupied another. A large bed sat in one corner, covered with thick wool blankets and furs. A table and 2 chairs completed the furnishings. Everything was clean and orderly, the home of someone who took pride in his space even if he lived alone. Annabelle moved to the fireplace and held her hands out toward the banked coals, savoring the warmth. She heard Daniel enter behind her, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "I will get the fire going properly and make us something to eat." Annabelle sat, watching as Daniel efficiently built up the fire until flames were crackling cheerfully in the hearth. Then he moved to the kitchen area and began pulling out supplies: salt pork, beans, cornbread, coffee. He worked with practiced efficiency, clearly accustomed to caring for himself. "How long have you lived up here alone?" Annabelle asked, her curiosity overcoming her caution. 8 years, Daniel replied without turning around. "Came out here after the war. Wanted peace and quiet somewhere far from people and their troubles. Found it up here in these mountains." "You fought in the war?" Annabelle asked. "Union Army," Daniel confirmed. "Saw more death and suffering than any man should have to see. When it was over, I just wanted to get as far from civilization as possible. So I came west, found this spot, and built myself a life." He set a pan on the stove and began frying the salt pork, filling the cabin with a delicious aroma that made Annabelle's mouth water. She could not remember the last time she had eaten a proper meal. "What about you?" Daniel asked. "What are you running from?" Annabelle tensed. "You said no questions." "I said you could leave in the morning with no questions asked," Daniel corrected. "But if you are going to stay here tonight, I would like to know if I am harboring a murderer or a thief or something worse." "I am not a murderer," Annabelle said hotly. "I am innocent." I witnessed a murder, and the men who did it are trying to silence me before I can tell anyone what I saw." Daniel turned to look at her, his dark eyes serious. "Tell me what happened." So Annabelle told him. The words poured out of her in a rush, all the fear and grief and anger she had been holding inside for weeks. She told him about her father's mining claim, about the rich vein of gold he had finally found after years of hard work. She told him about the 3 men from the neighboring claim, how she had seen them shoot her father and leave him to die. She told him about running, about hiding, about the lies they had spread claiming she was the killer. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he turned back to the stove and dished up 2 plates of food. "You know the names of these men?" he asked, setting a plate in front of her. "The leader is called Jack Sullivan," Annabelle said. "The other 2 are his brothers, Frank and Martin. They have a claim about half a mile from where my father was working." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know of them. Rough types not well liked in town, but they have money and connections, which makes them dangerous." "So you believe me?" Annabelle asked, hardly daring to hope. "I believe you," Daniel said simply. "I have met men like the Sullivans before. They take what they want and destroy anyone who gets in their way. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I do not know," Annabelle admitted. "I cannot go to the law. The Sullivans have them convinced I am the killer, and I cannot keep running forever. Eventually they will find me or winter will kill me." "You could go east," Daniel suggested. "Leave Colorado entirely, start fresh somewhere else." "With what money?" Annabelle asked bitterly. "I have nothing. And even if I could afford passage east, I would be running for the rest of my life, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if they had found me." Daniel studied her for a long moment. "Then you need to prove your innocence. Find evidence that shows the Sullivans killed your father. Bring it to someone who can help you." "How?" Annabelle asked. "It is my word against theirs, and they have already convinced everyone I am guilty." "Eat your food," Daniel said. "You are exhausted and half-starved. We can talk more about this in the morning when you have rested and have a clear head." Annabelle realized she had been so focused on their conversation that she had not touched the food in front of her. She picked up her fork and took a bite, and the taste of hot food after weeks of near starvation was almost overwhelming. She ate ravenously, barely pausing to breathe, and Daniel watched with a slight smile. "Slow down," he said gently. "You will make yourself sick if you eat too fast after going hungry so long." Annabelle forced herself to eat more slowly, savoring each bite. It was simple food, nothing fancy, but it tasted like heaven. When she had finished, Daniel poured her a cup of coffee and she wrapped her hands around it, absorbing the warmth. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For the food, for believing me. You did not have to help me." "We all need help sometimes," Daniel said. "I learned that the hard way during the war. The men who saved my life when I was wounded did not have to help me either, but they did. Figure I owe it to the world to pass that kindness along when I can." Annabelle felt tears prickling at her eyes, the first she had allowed herself to cry since her father's death. She blinked them back, not wanting to break down in front of this stranger who had shown her more kindness than anyone else in weeks. Daniel stood and moved to a wooden chest in the corner. He pulled out a thick wool blanket and a pillow. "You take the bed," he said. "I will sleep by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Annabelle protested. "This is your home." "And you are my guest," Daniel said firmly. "Besides, I have slept in far worse places than a warm floor in front of a fire. The bed is yours for tonight." Annabelle was too exhausted to argue. She moved to the bed and sank down onto it, and the softness of the mattress after weeks of sleeping on hard ground was almost enough to make her weep. She lay down and pulled the blankets over herself, and warmth enveloped her like an embrace. "Thank you, Daniel," she whispered. "Sleep well, Annabelle," he replied, settling himself on the floor near the fire. Annabelle's eyes widened. "I never told you my name." Daniel glanced at her over his shoulder. "You did, actually, when you were telling me about your father. You said his name was Thomas Dixon, which makes you Annabelle Dixon, unless you have a sister I do not know about." Annabelle relaxed slightly. He was right. She had been so caught up in her story that she had not even realized she had revealed her name. "Good night, Daniel," she said. "Good night, Annabelle." Annabelle closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, she felt safe enough to truly sleep. The warmth of the fire, the comfort of the bed, and the presence of the quiet, strong man who had offered her shelter, all combined to give her the first real rest she had known since her father's murder. She drifted off into a deep, dreamless sleep. When Annabelle woke, sunlight was streaming through the cabin's small windows. For a moment she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was. Then memory flooded back and she sat up quickly, looking around. Daniel was at the stove, cooking something that smelled wonderful. He glanced over his shoulder when he heard her stir. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Annabelle admitted. She felt almost guilty for how rested she felt, as if she had no right to comfort when her father was dead and his killers were still free. "Good," Daniel said. "Come eat breakfast, and then we need to talk about what happens next." Annabelle rose and moved to the table, where Daniel set a plate of fried eggs and bacon in front of her. She ate more slowly this time, her stomach having adjusted somewhat to having food in it again. When she had finished, Daniel sat down across from her, his expression serious. "You have a choice to make, Annabelle. You can leave this morning as we agreed, go back to hiding and running. Or you can stay here, let me protect you while we figure out a way to prove your innocence and bring the Sullivan brothers to justice." Annabelle stared at him. "Why would you do that? You do not know me. This is not your fight." "Maybe not," Daniel agreed. "But I cannot in good conscience send you back out there to fend for yourself. And I do not like the idea of murderers walking free while an innocent woman hides in fear. I told you, I came up here to get away from people and their troubles. But that does not mean I have forgotten how to tell right from wrong. It could be dangerous," Annabelle warned. "The Sullivans are ruthless. They have already killed once and they would not hesitate to kill again if they thought you were helping me." Daniel's expression hardened. "Let them try. I have faced worse than 3 greedy miners, and I know these mountains better than anyone. If they want to come after me on my own ground, they are welcome to try." Annabelle felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. The idea of having someone on her side, someone strong enough and brave enough to stand against the Sullivans, was almost too good to believe. But she did not want Daniel to get hurt or killed because of her. "I do not want your death on my conscience," she said quietly. "Then we will just have to make sure neither of us dies," Daniel replied. "What do you say, Annabelle? Will you stay and let me help you?" Annabelle looked into his dark eyes and saw nothing but honesty and determination. This man, this stranger who had pulled her out of the cold and fed her and offered her shelter, was willing to risk his life to help her find justice for her father. How could she refuse that? "Yes," she said. "I will stay." Daniel nodded, satisfied. "Good. Then the first thing we need to do is make sure you are properly equipped to survive up here. You need warm clothes, boots that fit, and some meat on your bones. Winter comes early in the high country, and you are in no shape to face it." Over the next few days, Daniel kept Annabelle busy. He gave her some of his old clothes to wear, shirts and pants that were far too large for her but were warm and practical. He taught her how to chop wood, how to tend the fire, how to prepare game for cooking. Annabelle threw herself into the work, grateful to have something to occupy her mind besides fear and grief. She learned that Daniel was a hunter and trapper, making his living by selling furs and meat to the town below. He was entirely self-sufficient, growing what vegetables he could in the short mountain summer and preserving them for winter. He hunted elk and deer for meat, trapped beaver and fox for their pelts. It was a hard life, but there was a simplicity to it that Annabelle found appealing. As she worked alongside him, Annabelle could not help but notice the raw physical power in Daniel's body. His arms were thick with muscle from years of swinging an axe and hauling heavy loads. His shoulders were broad enough that he seemed to fill doorways when he passed through them. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who had worked hard his entire life. There was something deeply reassuring about his strength, something that made Annabelle feel safer than she had in weeks. But it was not just his physical presence that drew her. It was the quiet kindness he showed her, the patience with which he taught her new skills, the gentle humor that occasionally lightened his serious demeanor. Daniel Irons was a good man, Annabelle realized, a man who had been hurt by the world but had not let it make him cruel or bitter. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Annabelle asked him about the war. She had been curious since he first mentioned it, but had been hesitant to pry. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "It was hell," he said finally. "Pure hell. I enlisted when I was 18, full of patriotic fervor and ideas about glory. Took about a week of actual fighting to cure me of those notions. I saw boys younger than me blown apart by cannon fire, saw men die screaming in field hospitals, saw things no person should ever have to see." "How did you survive it?" Annabelle asked softly. "I do not know," Daniel admitted. "Luck, mostly, and the help of good men who watched my back when I could not watch it myself. I was wounded twice, once at Antietam and once at Gettysburg. Should have died both times, but field surgeons managed to patch me up. When the war finally ended, I just wanted to forget everything I had seen, everything I had done. So I came out here where the only sounds are wind and water and animals, where nobody asks me about the war or expects me to be a hero." "You are a hero, though," Annabelle said. "You fought for what was right, even when it was hard." Daniel shook his head. "I was a soldier doing what I was ordered to do. There was nothing heroic about it. Real heroism is what you did, Annabelle. Seeing your father murdered and still having the courage to run, to survive, to keep fighting for justice instead of giving up. That takes real strength." Annabelle felt her cheeks flush. "I do not feel strong. I feel terrified most of the time. Courage is not the absence of fear," Daniel said. "It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear. You have more courage than you give yourself credit for." Their eyes met across the fire, and Annabelle felt something shift between them. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. A connection, a recognition of something deeper than just gratitude or friendship. Daniel looked away first, standing up abruptly. "We should get some sleep. Tomorrow, I want to ride down toward your father's claim, see if we can find any evidence the Sullivans might have left behind." "Is that safe?" Annabelle asked. "They might be watching the claim." "Which is why I will be doing the looking while you stay here," Daniel said firmly. "I can move through these woods without being seen. You, on the other hand, are still learning. Besides, they are looking for you, not me. I can scout around without raising suspicion." Annabelle wanted to protest, wanted to insist on going with him, but she knew he was right. She would only slow him down and put them both at risk. "Be careful," she said instead. "Always am," Daniel replied with a slight smile. The next morning, Daniel left before dawn, taking his rifle and moving silently into the forest. Annabelle spent the day trying to keep herself busy, but worry gnawed at her. What if the Sullivans spotted him? What if they realized he was helping her? What if something happened to him because of her? The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Annabelle chopped wood until her arms ached, prepared a stew for dinner, mended one of Daniel's shirts that had torn. But nothing could truly distract her from her anxiety. It was well after dark when she finally heard the sound of a horse approaching. Annabelle grabbed the rifle Daniel had left for her and positioned herself by the window, her heart pounding. But when the rider came into view in the moonlight, she recognized Daniel's broad-shouldered form and sagged with relief. She ran outside to meet him as he dismounted. "Thank God you are back. I was so worried." Daniel looked surprised by her concern but not displeased. "I am fine, and I found something interesting." He led her inside and pulled a leather pouch from inside his coat. "I searched the area around your father's claim, particularly the Sullivan brothers' camp. Found this hidden under a loose floorboard in their cabin." He opened the pouch and poured its contents onto the table. Gold nuggets, dozens of them, gleaming in the firelight. "That is from my father's claim," Annabelle breathed. "I recognize some of these pieces. He showed them to me the day before he died." "That is what I figured," Daniel said. "This is stolen gold taken from your father's claim after they killed him. It is not proof of murder on its own, but it shows they had motive and opportunity, and it ties them directly to your father's claim." "But how do we use this to prove my innocence?" Annabelle asked. "If we take it to the law, the Sullivans will just claim I stole it or that you are lying to protect me." Daniel frowned. "You are right. We need more. We need someone the town will believe, someone who can testify that the Sullivans are lying." "Who would do that?" Annabelle asked. "Everyone believes their story." "Not everyone," Daniel said thoughtfully. "There was another miner working a claim near your father's. Older man, name of Henry Carter. I have traded with him a few times over the years. He is honest, well respected. If he saw or heard something, his word would carry weight." "Do you think he knows something?" Annabelle asked, hope rising in her chest. "Only one way to find out," Daniel said. "I will ride out tomorrow and talk to him, but this time you are coming with me." "Is that wise?" Annabelle asked. "If the Sullivans see me." "We will stay off the main trails and keep to the deep woods," Daniel said. "But I need you with me so you can confirm what your father told you, help me ask the right questions. And I am not comfortable leaving you here alone all day. Too much could happen." Annabelle felt a warmth spread through her chest at his protectiveness. "All right, we go together." They set out the next morning, riding double on Daniel's horse through the dense pine forests. Daniel knew paths that Annabelle had never seen, game trails and hidden routes that wound through the mountains like secrets. He rode with easy confidence, one arm steady on the reins while Annabelle held onto him from behind. Henry Carter's claim was about 3 miles from where Thomas Dixon had been working. They approached cautiously, Daniel scanning the area for any sign of the Sullivan brothers, before riding into the small clearing where Henry had his camp. The old miner looked up from the sluice box where he was working and reached for his rifle when he saw riders approaching. But when he recognized Daniel, he relaxed slightly. "Daniel Irons," Henry called out. "What brings you down out of your mountain hideaway?" "Need to talk to you, Henry," Daniel replied, dismounting and helping Annabelle down. "This is Annabelle Dixon, Thomas Dixon's daughter." Henry's expression changed, becoming wary. "I heard about what happened to Tom, terrible thing, but I also heard his daughter killed him and ran off." "That is a lie," Annabelle said firmly. "The Sullivan brothers killed my father over his gold claim, and I saw them do it. They spread that story about me to cover their tracks." Henry studied her for a long moment. "If that is true, why should I believe you? Why should I risk getting involved?" "Because my father spoke highly of you," Annabelle said. "He said you were one of the few honest men left in these mountains, and because you knew him well enough to know he had finally struck a rich vein. The Sullivans wanted that gold, and they were willing to kill for it. Tom did have good luck recently, Henry admitted. Showed me some nuggets he pulled out of a new vein he had found, was right excited about it, but that does not prove the Sullivans killed him. Did you see or hear anything the day he died? Daniel asked. Anything unusual? Henry was quiet, and Annabelle could see the internal struggle on his face. He was afraid, she realized, afraid of what might happen if he spoke against the Sullivans. Henry, she said gently, I know you are scared, but my father is dead and I am being hunted for a crime I did not commit. If you know something, anything, please tell us. I am begging you. The old miner sighed heavily. I heard gunshots that day, he said finally, 3 of them close together, coming from the direction of Tom's claim. I thought maybe he was hunting, but it struck me as odd because Tom usually did his hunting in the morning, not midday. And then later that afternoon, I saw the Sullivan brothers riding past my claim, heading toward town. They were in a hurry, looked agitated. Did you tell anyone this? Daniel asked. Henry shook his head. Who was I going to tell? By the time I heard Tom was dead and his daughter was accused, the Sullivans already had their story straight, and I did not actually see them kill him. Just heard shots and saw them riding away. That is not proof of anything. But it establishes they were in the area when he died, Daniel said. Combined with the gold we found hidden in their cabin, it starts to build a case. You found gold in their cabin? Henry asked sharply. Daniel pulled out the leather pouch and showed him the nuggets. Hidden under a floorboard. Annabelle recognized them as coming from her father's claim. Henry picked up one of the nuggets, examining it closely. This is from the vein Tom found, all right. I can tell by the quality and color. I have been mining these mountains for 20 years, and I know the gold from this area. This did not come from the Sullivan claim. Their gold is lower quality, more dirt in it. Would you be willing to testify to that? Annabelle asked. To what you heard and saw that day, and to the fact that this gold came from my father's claim. Henry looked at her, and she could see fear and indecision warring in his eyes. The Sullivans have friends in this town, girl. Powerful friends. If I speak against them, I am putting a target on my back. I know, Annabelle said, and I would not ask if there was any other way, but you are the only person who can help me prove my innocence. Without your testimony, I am going to spend the rest of my life running and hiding, always looking over my shoulder. Is that what my father would have wanted? Henry closed his eyes. Tom was a good man, a good friend. He did not deserve what happened to him. He opened his eyes and looked at Annabelle with new resolve. All right, I will testify, but we need to do this carefully, make sure we have all our evidence together before we approach the law. The Sullivans cannot be allowed to cover this up or intimidate witnesses. Agreed, Daniel said. Is there anyone else who might have seen or heard something? Anyone else who can corroborate your story? Henry thought for a moment. There is a supply merchant in town, name of Robert Fletcher. He keeps records of everyone who buys equipment and supplies. Tom bought a new pick and sluice box about a week before he died, told Robert he had found a rich vein. Robert might remember that conversation, might even have it written down in his ledgers. That could help establish motive, Daniel said. If we can show that the Sullivans knew Tom had struck gold, it strengthens the case that they killed him for it. They spent another hour talking with Henry, going over every detail of what he had seen and heard. By the time they left, Annabelle felt more hopeful than she had in weeks. They were building a case, piece by piece. It was not perfect and there were still risks, but it was more than she had dared to hope for. As they rode back toward Daniel's cabin, Annabelle found herself leaning against his broad back, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. She felt safe with him, safer than she had felt since her father's death. And it was not just his physical strength that made her feel that way. It was his steady presence, his quiet determination, his willingness to stand beside her against terrible odds. "Thank you," she said softly, her words barely audible over the sound of the horse's hooves on the trail. "For what?" Daniel asked. "For believing in me, for helping me, for giving me hope when I had none left." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "You do not need to thank me, Annabelle. What is happening to you is wrong, and I am just trying to make it right." "It is more than that," Annabelle insisted. "You have given me shelter, protection, kindness. You have risked your safety for a stranger. That is not nothing." "You are not a stranger anymore," Daniel said, and there was something in his voice that made Annabelle's heart skip a beat. "You are someone I care about, someone I want to keep safe." Annabelle did not know what to say to that. Her feelings for Daniel had been growing over the past days, but she had tried to push them down, telling herself it was just gratitude, just the natural response to someone who had saved her. But hearing him say that he cared about her, that she mattered to him, made it impossible to deny what she was feeling. She tightened her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his back. "I care about you too," she whispered. Daniel's hand came down to cover hers where it rested against his stomach, his large, rough hand engulfing her smaller one. He did not say anything more, but he did not need to. The gesture said everything. They rode in comfortable silence for the rest of the journey, and when they reached the cabin, Daniel helped Annabelle dismount with a gentleness that made her breath catch. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Annabelle thought he might kiss her. But then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "I will take care of the horse," he said, his voice slightly rough. "You go inside and warm up." Annabelle nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She went into the cabin and stood by the fire, her mind whirling with confusion and longing. She was falling in love with Daniel Irons. It was foolish, perhaps even dangerous given their situation, but it was undeniable. Over the next few days, they continued to gather evidence. Daniel rode into Aurora and spoke with Robert Fletcher, who confirmed that Thomas Dixon had purchased mining equipment just before his death and had mentioned striking a rich vein. Robert even had the transaction recorded in his ledger, dated just 3 days before the murder. They also learned that the Sullivan brothers had been spending gold freely in the town's saloons and gambling halls, far more than their claim should have produced. Several merchants commented on it, wondering where the sudden wealth had come from, but gathering evidence was one thing. Presenting it to the law was another. The town marshal was a man named Ed Hawkins, and according to Henry, Hawkins had accepted the Sullivan brothers' story without much question. Whether that was because he believed them or because they had paid him off was unclear. "We need to go over Hawkins' head," Daniel said one evening as they discussed their options. "Take our evidence directly to the territorial judge in Denver." "That is a week's ride from here," Annabelle said. "And the Sullivans will hear about it if we start making preparations for a journey like that. They will come after us." "Then we do not make it obvious," Daniel said. "We leave quietly, take back routes through the mountains. By the time anyone realizes we are gone, we will be too far ahead for them to catch us." "It is risky," Annabelle said. "Everything about this situation is risky," Daniel replied. "But sitting here doing nothing is not an option. Eventually, the Sullivans will figure out where you are hiding. When that happens, they will come for you. I can defend this cabin against a lot, but not against a determined group of armed men. We need to act while we still have the element of surprise." Annabelle knew he was right. They had been lucky so far, but luck did not last forever. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow, before dawn," Daniel said. "We will pack tonight, travel light and fast. With good weather and hard riding, we can make Denver in 5 days instead of 7. They spent that evening preparing for the journey. Daniel packed supplies, food and water and ammunition. He checked his weapons carefully, loading his rifle and the 2 pistols he owned. Annabelle watched him work, seeing the soldier he had once been in the efficient, methodical way he prepared for danger. "You are worried," she said. Daniel glanced at her. "Always before heading into uncertain situations. Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you alive. It is when you stop being afraid that you make mistakes." "Were you afraid during the war?" Annabelle asked. "Every single day," Daniel admitted. "Terrified most of the time. But I learned to push it down, to function despite it. That is what soldiers do." Annabelle moved closer to him. "You do not have to do this, you know. This is my fight, not yours. You could stay here, let me go to Denver on my own." Daniel turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "That is not going to happen, Annabelle. I am not sending you out there alone to face whatever dangers might come. We are in this together now." "Why?" Annabelle asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you willing to risk so much for me?" Daniel reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his calloused fingers lingering against her cheek. "Because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for. Someone brave and strong who deserves better than what life has given her. And because somewhere along the way, keeping you safe stopped being just the right thing to do and started being the most important thing in my world." Annabelle's breath caught. "Daniel." He cupped her face in both his large hands, looking down at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "I am falling in love with you, Annabelle Dixon. I know the timing is terrible. I know we are in the middle of a fight for your life, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel this way. You have become everything to me." Tears filled Annabelle's eyes. "I love you too. I have been trying not to, telling myself it was just gratitude or fear making me feel this way, but it is not. It is real. You are the best man I have ever known, and I love you." Daniel bent his head and kissed her, and it was like coming home. His lips were gentle despite his strength, reverent in a way that made Annabelle's heart soar. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing closer to him, and felt his arms come around her waist, holding her securely against his broad chest. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens in Denver, whatever we face on the road, we face it together. I promise you, Annabelle, I will keep you safe. I will not let the Sullivan brothers hurt you." "I know," Annabelle whispered. "I trust you completely." They held each other for a long moment, drawing strength from their closeness. Then Daniel gently released her. "We should get some sleep. We have a long ride ahead of us tomorrow." That night, Annabelle lay in Daniel's bed while he settled himself on the floor by the fire as usual. But this time, she could not sleep. After an hour of tossing and turning, she got up and padded over to where Daniel lay. "Annabelle," he said softly, clearly still awake. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," she said. "I just do not want to sleep alone tonight. Can I stay here with you?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, then he lifted the blanket in invitation. Annabelle slipped in beside him, and he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close against his chest. She could feel the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his body, and she had never felt safer or more cherished. "Sleep," Daniel murmured against her hair. "I have you." Annabelle closed her eyes and let herself drift off, wrapped in the protective embrace of the man she loved. They left before dawn, as planned. The journey to Denver was long and hard, taking them through mountain passes and across open plains. Daniel kept them off the main roads, using his knowledge of the wilderness to find routes that few others knew. They saw no sign of pursuit, but neither of them relaxed their vigilance. At night, they camped in hidden spots, taking turns keeping watch. Daniel was always alert, always aware of their surroundings. Annabelle marveled at how he could sleep lightly and wake at the slightest unusual sound. The soldier in him was never fully at rest, but there were gentle moments too. Daniel showed Annabelle how to read signs in the wilderness, how to tell which way water flowed by watching the growth of moss on trees, how to find north by the stars. He told her stories about his time in the mountains, about the elk he had hunted and the winters he had survived. And at night, when they lay together under the stars, he held her close and made her feel like the most precious thing in the world. On the fourth day, disaster struck. They were crossing a river, the water running high and fast from recent rains. Daniel had scouted a shallow crossing point, but halfway across, the horse lost its footing on the slippery rocks. Annabelle was thrown into the current, the cold water closing over her head. She surfaced, gasping and choking, and the current swept her downstream. She fought to keep her head above water, but the river was too strong. Then strong hands grabbed her, and Daniel was there, having jumped in after her. He pulled her against him with one arm while using the other to swim toward shore. They washed up on a rocky beach 100 yards downstream, both soaked and shivering. Daniel's horse had made it across and was standing on the far bank, looking back at them. "Are you all right?" Daniel demanded, running his hands over Annabelle to check for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "I am fine," Annabelle said through chattering teeth. "Just cold and wet." Daniel pulled her to her feet. "We need to get dry and warm before we freeze. Come on." He led her into the forest and quickly built a fire, then stripped off his wet shirt and wrung it out. Annabelle tried not to stare at his bare chest, at the thick muscles and old scars that marked his skin, but it was difficult. Even soaked and shivering, Daniel Irons was magnificent. He caught her looking and smiled slightly. "You should get out of those wet clothes too, Annabelle. You will catch your death if you stay in them." Annabelle blushed but knew he was right. She turned her back and stripped off her wet dress and undergarments, then wrapped herself in a dry blanket from their pack. When she turned around, Daniel had his back to her, giving her privacy while he hung their wet clothes near the fire to dry. They huddled together by the fire, sharing body heat beneath the blanket. It was intimate and innocent at the same time, born of necessity but charged with the awareness of their growing feelings for each other. "Thank you for saving me," Annabelle said softly. "Again." "Always," Daniel replied, his arm tightening around her. "I will always save you, Annabelle, no matter what it takes." They stayed by the fire until their clothes were dry enough to wear, then continued their journey. The river crossing had cost them time, but they pushed on, and by nightfall on the fifth day, they could see the lights of Denver in the distance. "We made it," Annabelle breathed, hardly daring to believe it. "We made it," Daniel confirmed. "Tomorrow, we find the territorial judge and present our evidence, and then this nightmare will be over." They camped outside the city that night, both too anxious to sleep well. At first light, they rode into Denver and made their way to the courthouse. The territorial judge, a stern-looking man named William Harrison, agreed to see them after Daniel explained the urgency of their situation. Judge Harrison listened carefully as Annabelle told her story, examining each piece of evidence they had gathered. The gold from the Sullivan cabin, Henry Carter's testimony about the gunshots and the brothers riding away, Robert Fletcher's ledger showing Thomas Dixon's mining equipment purchase, and his mention of striking gold, the reports from various merchants about the Sullivans spending far more than their claim should produce. When they had finished, Judge Harrison sat back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "This is compelling evidence, Miss Dixon, but it is largely circumstantial. There are no eyewitnesses to the actual murder." "I am an eyewitness," Annabelle said firmly. "I saw the Sullivan brothers standing over my father's body, arguing about how to divide the gold. I heard them talk about killing him. Your testimony alone is not enough, given that the accused have already established a counter-narrative, Judge Harrison said. However, combined with the physical evidence and the supporting testimony from Mr. Carter and Mr. Fletcher, I believe there is sufficient cause to issue warrants for the arrest of Jack, Frank, and Martin Sullivan on charges of murder and theft. Relief flooded through Annabelle. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much. Do not thank me yet, Judge Harrison said. The hard part is still ahead. We need to arrest these men and bring them to trial. And given what you have told me about their connections in Aurora, that may not be easy. I will send a U.S. Marshal with a deputy to Aurora to execute the warrants. You two should stay here in Denver until the arrests are made. It is not safe for you to return. Daniel shook his head. With all due respect, Your Honor, I am going back to Aurora. The Sullivans know that country better than any federal marshal. If they decide to run or fight, local knowledge could mean the difference between success and failure. I can help track them down. It is dangerous, Mr. Irons, the judge warned. I know, Daniel said, but I am going anyway. Judge Harrison studied him for a moment, then nodded. Very well. I will inform Marshal Cooper that you will be accompanying him, but Miss Dixon stays here under protection until this matter is resolved. No, Annabelle said immediately. I am going too. I did not come all this way just to hide while other people fight my battles. Annabelle, it is too dangerous, Daniel said. I do not care, Annabelle replied. Those men killed my father. I have a right to see them brought to justice. And you are not going without me. Daniel looked like he wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in her eyes. He sighed. Judge, can we have a moment alone? Judge Harrison nodded and left the room. As soon as the door closed, Daniel turned to Annabelle. I need you to stay here where it is safe, he said. If something happens to me, I need to know you are protected. Nothing is going to happen to you, Annabelle said fiercely. And I am not letting you face the Sullivans without me. We are partners, Daniel. We face this together, remember. Daniel pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met. You love me anyway, Annabelle said. I do, Daniel admitted, which is why the thought of you being in danger makes me crazy. But I also know that trying to keep you here against your will would only make you angry with me. So we go together. But you stay close to me at all times, and you do exactly what I say if trouble starts. Agreed, Annabelle said, hugging him tightly. They returned to Aurora 2 days later, accompanied by U.S. Marshal John Cooper and his deputy, a young man named Sam Wright. The marshal was experienced and capable, but Daniel could see that he was unfamiliar with mountain country. Cooper kept looking around nervously as they climbed into the high country, clearly out of his element. They reached Aurora in the late afternoon and went directly to the town marshal's office. Ed Hawkins looked up in surprise when they walked in, and his eyes widened when he saw Annabelle. That is her, he said, reaching for his gun. That is the Dixon girl who killed her father. I would not do that if I were you, Marshal, Cooper said, his hand on his own weapon. I am U.S. Marshal John Cooper, and I have warrants for the arrest of Jack, Frank, and Martin Sullivan on charges of murder and theft. Miss Dixon is a witness, not a suspect. Hawkins looked confused and angry. What are you talking about? The Sullivans did not kill anyone. The girl did it, ran off in a fit of madness. That is the story the Sullivans told, but the evidence suggests otherwise, Cooper said. He handed Hawkins the warrants. Where can I find them? Hawkins read the warrants, his face going red. This is insane. The Sullivans are respected members of this community. You are making a terrible mistake. Then they will have the opportunity to prove their innocence at trial, Cooper said. Now, where are they? Probably at their claim or at the Silver Dollar Saloon, Hawkins said sullenly. But I am telling you this is wrong. Your objection is noted, Cooper said. Mr. Irons, you know this town. Where should we start? Daniel thought for a moment. The saloon is more public, more dangerous. Too many places for them to take cover or use bystanders as shields. Better to approach them at their claim where we can control the situation. Cooper nodded. Lead the way. They rode out to the Sullivan brothers' claim as the sun was setting. Daniel approached cautiously, signaling for the others to spread out and surround the small cabin. There was smoke coming from the chimney and horses in the corral, suggesting the brothers were home. Cooper called out in a loud, clear voice. Jack, Frank, and Martin Sullivan, this is U.S. Marshal John Cooper. I have warrants for your arrest on charges of murder and theft. Come out with your hands up and no one gets hurt. There was a long moment of silence. Then gunfire erupted from the cabin windows, bullets whistling through the air. Everyone dove for cover. So much for doing this the easy way, Cooper muttered. He called out again. You are only making this worse for yourselves. Surrender now and you will get a fair trial. We are not surrendering to anyone, Jack Sullivan's voice shouted back. We have not done anything wrong and we are not going to hang for killing that worthless prospector. You want us, come and get us. Daniel had positioned himself behind a large tree and Annabelle was beside him, pressed against the trunk. Stay down, he told her. Do not move unless I tell you to. The standoff continued for nearly an hour, with occasional exchanges of gunfire. The Sullivans were well armed and determined, and their cabin was solidly built. But they were also trapped, with no way to escape without exposing themselves to fire. As darkness fell, Daniel had an idea. He crawled over to where Marshal Cooper was taking cover. The cabin has a back window that opens onto the creek, he said quietly. If we wait for full dark, I can sneak around and approach from that direction. When I signal, you and your deputy create a distraction from the front. I will slip in through the back and take them by surprise. That is risky, Cooper said. Everything about this situation is risky, Daniel replied. But we cannot sit here all night. They have food and water in there. We do not. Eventually they will start picking us off. Cooper considered, then nodded. All right, but be careful. Daniel made his way back to Annabelle and explained the plan. She grabbed his arm. Please be careful. I will, Daniel promised. He kissed her quickly, then disappeared into the gathering darkness. Annabelle watched him go, her heart in her throat. She knew Daniel was capable and experienced, but the thought of him walking into danger made her feel sick with fear. She crouched behind the tree, her hands clenched into fists, and prayed. Daniel moved through the darkness like a ghost, using every skill he had learned during the war and his years in the wilderness. He circled wide around the cabin, approaching from downstream where the sound of the creek would cover any noise he made. The back window was dark, and he could hear voices inside the cabin, the Sullivan brothers arguing about their next move. He waited until he was directly beneath the window, then pulled himself up and peered inside. He could see all three brothers gathered near the front of the cabin, watching the marshal's positions. Their backs were to him. Daniel eased the window open slowly, carefully. It creaked slightly, but the sound was lost in the brothers' heated discussion. He climbed through the window and dropped silently to the floor inside, his pistol drawn. Nobody move, he said quietly. The three brothers spun around, reaching for their guns. Daniel fired, his shot deliberate and precise. Jack Sullivan screamed and dropped his weapon, clutching his arm where Daniel's bullet had struck him. I said nobody move, Daniel repeated, his voice cold and hard. The next one of you that reaches for a gun gets shot somewhere less survivable. Outside, Marshal Cooper heard the shot and kicked in the front door, his own weapon drawn. Frank and Martin Sullivan found themselves caught between two armed men with nowhere to go. "It is over," Cooper said. "Drop your weapons and put your hands on your heads." For a moment, it looked like Frank might try to fight anyway. But then he saw the look in Daniel's eyes and thought better of it. Slowly, all three brothers raised their hands. Marshal Cooper and his deputy moved in and shackled the Sullivan brothers, reading them their rights. Jack was bleeding from the arm wound, but it was not serious. Daniel had shot to disable, not to kill. Annabelle appeared in the doorway, and when she saw Daniel standing there unharmed, she let out a sob of relief and ran to him. He caught her with one arm, holding her close. "It is over," he murmured against her hair. "They are under arrest. You are safe now." Annabelle clung to him, tears streaming down her face. Tears of relief, of grief for her father, of joy that the nightmare was finally ending. The Sullivan brothers were taken to Denver to await trial. Henry Carter, Robert Fletcher, and several other witnesses came forward with testimony now that the brothers were in custody. The trial lasted 3 days, and at the end of it, all 3 men were found guilty of murder and theft. They were sentenced to hang. Annabelle attended the trial, sitting in the courtroom every day and listening to the evidence. It was painful to hear the details of her father's death laid out so clinically, but it was also necessary. She needed to see justice done, needed to know that her father's killers would pay for what they had done. When the verdict was read, she felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory. Just a deep, bone-weary relief that it was finally over. Her father was still gone, that wound would never fully heal, but at least his killers would not walk free. Daniel was beside her throughout the trial, a steady, comforting presence. When it was over, he took her hand and led her outside into the bright Denver sunshine. "What happens now?" Annabelle asked. She felt adrift, uncertain. The fight for justice had consumed her for months, and now that it was over, she did not know what to do with herself. "Now we decide what we want our lives to look like," Daniel said. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Annabelle Dixon, I know this is not the most romantic setting, and I know we have been through hell together. But I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone. You are brave and strong and beautiful, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me?" Annabelle felt tears spring to her eyes again, but this time they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Daniel, I will marry you. I love you so much." Daniel pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Annabelle felt like she was finally, truly safe. Not just safe from danger, but safe in the knowledge that she was loved, that she had found someone who would stand beside her no matter what life threw at them. They were married a week later in a small church in Denver, with Marshal Cooper and his wife standing as witnesses. Annabelle wore a simple dress of blue calico, and Daniel wore his best clothes, his long hair pulled back and his beard neatly trimmed. He looked handsome and strong and completely devoted as he spoke his vows. After the ceremony, they returned to Daniel's cabin in the mountains. It was late October now, and the aspens had turned brilliant gold against the dark green of the pines. The first snow had already dusted the highest peaks, a promise of the winter to come. But Annabelle was not afraid of the winter anymore. She had warm clothes, plenty of food, and most importantly, she had Daniel. Together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. Daniel carried her over the threshold of the cabin, and Annabelle laughed with pure joy. He set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irons," he said softly. "It is good to be home, Mr. Irons," Annabelle replied, standing on her toes to kiss him. That night, as they lay together in the big bed, warm beneath the furs and blankets, Annabelle thought about how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been sleeping under bridges, cold and terrified and alone. Now she was married to a good man who loved her, safe in a home that was hers, with a future stretching out before her full of possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, his fingers gently combing through her hair. "About how lucky I am," Annabelle said. "About how you saved my life in every way that matters." "You saved mine too," Daniel said. "I did not realize how lonely I was up here until you came along. I thought I was happy being alone, but I was just existing, not living. You taught me how to live again." Annabelle turned in his arms so she could see his face in the firelight. "I love you, Daniel Irons. I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you, Annabelle Irons," Daniel replied. "Always and forever." They made love that night, a gentle exploration of each other that was both passionate and tender. Daniel was careful with her, reverent, treating her like the precious gift she was. And Annabelle gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, trusting him with her body and her heart. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the warm darkness, Annabelle felt a peace she had never known before. She was loved. She was safe. She was home. The winter that followed was harsh, but Annabelle and Daniel faced it together. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking and laughing and learning each other's stories. Daniel taught Annabelle how to trap small game, how to preserve meat for the long winter, how to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of animals. Annabelle taught Daniel how to read, something he had never learned properly as a child. She read to him from the few books they had, her voice filling the cabin with stories and poems. When the snow was too deep to go outside, they stayed in bed, wrapped in each other's warmth. They made love and talked and dreamed about the future. Daniel spoke of expanding his trap lines, maybe getting some cattle to graze in the high meadows during the summer. Annabelle talked about starting a garden, about making the cabin into a real home. Spring came late to the mountains, but when it finally arrived, it brought new life and new possibilities. Annabelle discovered she was pregnant in April, and Daniel's joy was almost overwhelming. He built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving designs into the headboard. He hunted extra game and put up extra preserves, determined that his wife and coming child would want for nothing. Annabelle bloomed with pregnancy, her body growing round and full. She had never been happier. The grief over her father's death was still there, would always be there, but it had softened into something she could carry without it breaking her. She knew her father would be happy for her, would approve of Daniel and the life they were building together. In December of 1877, just over a year after Annabelle had first crawled beneath that bridge in Aurora, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas, after her father, and Daniel cried when he held his son for the first time. "He is perfect," Daniel whispered, staring down at the tiny face. "You did so well, Annabelle. Thank you for giving me this gift." Annabelle smiled tiredly from the bed. "We made him together. He is ours." Little Thomas Irons was a loud, demanding baby who kept them up at all hours, but neither of them minded. Daniel was a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk the baby when he cried, changing diapers and singing lullabies in his deep, rumbling voice. Annabelle watched him with their son and fell even more in love with him, if that was possible. As Thomas grew, the cabin rang with the sounds of childhood. He took his first steps holding onto his father's big hands, spoke his first words sitting in his mother's lap. He was curious and adventurous, always getting into things, and Daniel had to child-proof the cabin to keep him safe. 2 years after Thomas was born, Annabelle gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's dark eyes, and she was quieter than her brother, more contemplative. Thomas adored his little sister, appointing himself her protector from the moment she was born. The years passed, marked by the changing of the seasons and the growth of their children. Daniel's reputation as an honest trapper and hunter grew, and people from Aurora and surrounding towns sought him out for his pelts and meat. He built a good business, and the family prospered. Annabelle turned their cabin into a warm, welcoming home. She planted a garden that flourished in the short mountain summer, growing vegetables and herbs. She made curtains for the windows and quilts for the beds. She taught Thomas and Sarah to read and write, determined that they would have the education she had been denied. When Thomas was 10 and Sarah was 8, another child joined the family. This time it was twin boys, strong and healthy, whom they named James and William. The cabin was crowded now, full of noise and laughter and life. Daniel built an addition onto the cabin, creating more space for their growing family. He also built a schoolhouse in a nearby clearing, and Annabelle taught not just her own children, but also the children of other families who had settled in the mountains. She became known as a fine teacher, patient and kind, and parents came from miles around to enroll their children in her school. The years were not always easy. There were hard winters when game was scarce, summers when the garden struggled in drought. There were illnesses and injuries, the normal trials of frontier life. But Annabelle and Daniel faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Daniel took Annabelle back to the bridge where he had first found her. It was a warm September evening, much like that night so long ago. "Do you remember?" Daniel asked, his arm around her waist as they stood on the bridge looking down at the creek below. "How could I forget?" Annabelle said. "I was so scared, so alone, and then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I had not even known I was praying." "You were the bravest thing I had ever seen," Daniel said. "Frightened and starving, but still fighting, still surviving. I fell a little bit in love with you that first night, though I did not realize it at the time. We have had a good life, have we not?" Annabelle asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. "The best life," Daniel agreed. "You and the children are everything to me, Annabelle. You are my whole world." "And you are mine," Annabelle said. "I cannot imagine what my life would have been like if you had not found me that night. I probably would not have survived the winter." "Well, I did find you," Daniel said, "and I am grateful for it every single day. You made me whole again, Annabelle. Before you, I was just going through the motions, hiding from the world. You taught me how to live again, how to love, how to be part of something bigger than myself." They stood on the bridge as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. Below them, the creek babbled its eternal song. Around them, the mountains stood silent and strong, witnesses to their love story. "Let us go home," Annabelle said finally. "The children will be wondering where we are." They walked back to their horses, hand in hand, and rode back up the mountain to the cabin where their children waited. Thomas was 19 now, already taller than his father and just as strong. He was courting a girl from town, a sweet-natured young woman named Emma. Sarah was 17, beautiful and intelligent with dreams of becoming a doctor. The twins, James and William, were 9 years old and full of mischief, constantly getting into adventures in the woods. When Annabelle and Daniel arrived home, the cabin was full of warmth and light and the sounds of their family. Thomas was helping Sarah with dinner while the twins played a noisy game of checkers at the table. "Where have you been?" Sarah asked, smiling at her parents. "We were starting to worry." "Just taking a walk down memory lane," Daniel said, pulling Annabelle close and kissing the top of her head. "Your mother and I were feeling nostalgic." "Well, dinner is almost ready," Sarah said. "Thomas made his famous stew." They gathered around the table, the whole family together, and Daniel said grace. As they ate and talked and laughed, Annabelle looked around at the faces of her children, at the strong, good man who was her husband, and felt a profound gratitude for the life they had built. She thought of her father sometimes, wondered what he would think if he could see her now. She liked to imagine he was proud of her, pleased that she had found such happiness. The pain of his loss had faded over the years, but the love remained, a constant presence in her heart. After dinner, Daniel pulled out his fiddle, an instrument he had learned to play during the war. He played while the children danced and Annabelle clapped along and the cabin rang with music and joy. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Annabelle and Daniel sat by the fire, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "You ever regret it?" Annabelle asked. "Giving up your solitary life in the mountains for the chaos of a large family," Daniel laughed softly. "Not for a single moment. This chaos, as you call it, is the best thing that ever happened to me. I would not trade 1 second of it for all the peace and quiet in the world." "I love you, Daniel Irons," Annabelle said. "More today than yesterday, and I will love you even more tomorrow." "And I love you, Annabelle Irons," Daniel replied. "You are my heart, my home, my everything." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The mountains stood eternal around them, sheltering the life they had built together. Years continued to pass, bringing more grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Thomas married his Emma and built a ranch in the valley below. Sarah did indeed become a doctor, one of the first female physicians in Colorado, and she practiced medicine in Denver. The twins, James and William, followed in their father's footsteps, becoming skilled hunters and trappers who knew the mountains as well as Daniel did. Daniel and Annabelle grew old together, their hair turning silver, their movements becoming slower, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, tempered and strengthened by decades of shared experience. On a warm summer evening in 1916, Daniel and Annabelle sat on the porch of their cabin, holding hands and watching the sunset. They were both in their late 60s now, still healthy and active but aware that they were in the twilight of their lives. "60 years ago, I was sleeping under a bridge," Annabelle said softly. "Terrified and alone, certain I was going to die, and then you found me." "Best night of my life," Daniel said. "The night I found my whole future lying under a bridge trying to stay hidden." "You gave me everything, Daniel," Annabelle said, tears in her eyes. "A home, a family, a life beyond anything I could have dreamed. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Daniel corrected gently. "I was dead inside before you came along, Annabelle, just a shell of a man going through the motions. You brought me back to life, gave me purpose and meaning and love. Everything good in my life came from you." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun sink behind the mountains they had called home for so many years. The cabin behind them was quiet now, empty of children, but it was still full of memories, full of love, full of the life they had shared. "No regrets?" Annabelle asked. "Not a single one," Daniel replied. "Just gratitude, gratitude for every moment I have been blessed to spend with you." Annabelle squeezed his hand. "When we are gone, when our children tell their children about us, I hope they understand how much we loved each other. I hope they know that true love is real, that it is worth fighting for, worth holding on to no matter what life throws at you." "They will know," Daniel assured her. "We showed them by example. We taught them that love is not just a feeling, it is a choice you make every single day. A choice to stand beside each other, to support each other, to build a life together no matter what obstacles you face." As the last light faded from the sky, Daniel helped Annabelle to her feet, and they walked into the cabin together. their steps slow but steady. They had walked this path together for 40 years, and they would walk it together for however many years they had left. That night, as they lay in bed together, Annabelle thought about the girl she had been, sleeping under bridges and running for her life. She thought about the mountain man who had offered her protection and shelter, who had believed in her when no one else did. She thought about the life they had built together, the love they had shared, the legacy they were leaving behind. She fell asleep in Daniel's arms, as she had done for 40 years, feeling safe and loved and profoundly grateful for the unexpected blessings that had come from the darkest moment of her life. Years later, when Annabelle and Daniel were both gone, their children gathered at the old cabin to remember them. They told stories about their parents, about the love that had sustained them through decades of joy and sorrow. They spoke of Daniel's strength and gentleness, of Annabelle's courage and compassion. They talked about how their parents had faced terrible odds and come through stronger, how they had built a life and a legacy that would endure for generations. And they told the story of how it all began, on a cold September night in 1876, when a mountain man found a girl hiding under a bridge and offered her shelter. It was a story of love conquering fear, of hope triumphing over despair, of two souls finding each other in the wilderness and building something beautiful together. It was, they all agreed, the best love story they had ever heard. And the best part was that it was true.